A special good evening to you and a warm welcome to ChildLink's discussion, which focuses on various social issues. I'm your host, Tiana Jordan, ChildLink's Advocacy and Communications Officer. This afternoon, we will be discussing a very important topic, which is understanding gender based violence and its impact on survivors. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we're also observing 16 Days of Activism, which is a campaign that is aimed to raise awareness to gender based violence. Hence, this very important discussion. And we're honored to have with us this afternoon on the panel two very important persons, who will be sharing their knowledge on the topic, Mr. Kissoon and Miss Williams. A very good afternoon to you. How are you both doing this afternoon?
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks. I'm doing well. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah.
Yes, it's great to have you, be a part of our discussion this afternoon. This discussion, it falls under our Communities Responding in Emergencies CRIE project, which is funded by the Delegation of the European Union in Guyana. Now, I'll give both of you a few minutes or maybe, just to tell me a bit about yourselves and the work that you do. Mr. Kissoon, can you go first?
Okay. So I've been involved in the work against gender-based violence and for child protection since about 1996 when I got involved with Help and Shelter. And I have been involved in like education and advocacy. And we continue to learn about these issues. I have a particular interest in how we involve men in this work and looking at some of the systemic and structural issues which create gender-based violence. And I'm very grateful to all the survivors who've shared stories with me. None of this is my own. Anything that I share is not my knowledge. It's come from the work of other persons, a community of persons who have been doing this work across Guyana and the Caribbean, and we continue to learn. So I'm very grateful. Thanks to ChildLinK for inviting me here today. We had talked a lot on ChildLink's online programs before, so it's been a long time since I've been on live TV, so I'm a bit nervous as well. So please forgive me any stutterings and stumblings and so on. Yeah.
That's okay, and it's great to have you here, Miss Williams.
Thank you for having me and for the invitation. So my name is Buedeen Williams, and I'm the GBV Specialist at the organization NGO National Coordinating Coalition on their gender-based violence project. We have what we call the one-stop shop located in Regions 4 and 3, where we offer counseling services, legal service, safe space, and a referral system for our clients. We are doing works in regions, I think maybe in all the regions in Guyana except for Region 9. Hopefully that also is soon to be on our agenda. The work that we do, we target not only locals but the Venezuelan migrants because they are also considered a vulnerable group within Guyana who need assistance. We have been able to carry out successful outreaches in Region 3 and 4 we started, and we have progressed to Regions 7, 1, and 8. We have also done successful training sessions with healthcare workers, police officers in Regions 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and soon to add 1, 7, and 8 to that. Because as you would have mentioned, we are doing work within communities, and in order to build partnerships within communities, we think it's important to have healthcare workers and police officers understand the sensitivity of GBV.
That's great to know, and you both have been doing work as it relates to gender-based violence. So, I'm really excited to hear your views on today's topic. And with that being said, let's get right into it. Can you both share how you would describe gender-based violence? Maybe Miss Williams can go first.
I think, simply put for the audience, it is any violence enacted on a person because of their gender. So, for example, generally women are seen as the weaker sex. So it's easy for somebody to think maybe of male to think, I have the upper hand in a situation. And so they would use, for example, physical strength to take advantage. Vice versa, there are some situations where women might have the upper hand in a situation, maybe, to be fair, manipulation or even taking advantage of the laws, and they might use that to take advantage of a man. But even men also would experience physical abuse at the hands of a woman. So, whether male or female, any form of violence that is carried out on a person because of their gender is considered gender-based violence.
What about you, Mr. Kissoon?
So I so the definition that we just use, so because we understand gender as beyond the binary, that it's not just now there's just only male and female, but there are many people now who identify as non-binary, as transgender. But I describe, we're now using gender-based violence as that anything which is seen as traditional masculinity, trying to assert dominance over anything, any person who's not fitting into that ideal of what this traditional aggressive violent masculinity must be. And it's not only on individual relationships, it's also happening, say, within communities, it happens within a society and a structure. So when a state, for example, does not have the laws and systems in place to protect women and girls from gender-based violence, then the state too can be considered guilty of committing gender-based violence. And when we think of things of like rape being used as a weapon of war, so it's not just the one-on-one situation or the road situation. So it encompasses a whole series of behaviors, but basically it's to say that whatever is this male masculine idea of what is anything that does not fit into that, and then we experience it because those who've experienced it is because they're not fitting into what are deemed these traditional gender roles where power, it is an imbalance of power. So we talk about that.
Definitely. Right. And there are various forms of violence. Some persons may not be aware of them. So maybe we can now go into touch on specific types of gender-based violence to, make persons more aware of these types of violence. Mr. Kissoon?
So we talk about, I think Mr. Williams just mentioned, for example, physical abuse, which is a physical violence, which happens at different levels in the family setting. Intimate partner violence, what we call intimate partner violence. So the most pervasive form of gender-based violence is violence against women and girls. Women and girls are more likely to experience violence because of their gender from different sources than men and boys. It doesn't say, as Ms. Williams said, men and boys can experience this violence. But we must also acknowledge that the violence that men and boys are more likely to experience violence from other men and boys than they are from their intimate female partners. So this is something that we ought to talk about, that there's a problem with masculinity and violence. A lot of us, if you're reading the newspapers now, a lot of men who know each other are killing and maiming each other, school boys. So there's a lot of that violence going on. So we talk about one, intimate partner violence, which includes the dimensions, not only physical violence, but there's sexual violence, emotional, psychological, cyber stalking. There's the whole spectrum of sexual offenses, which could happen from persons who are known to the survivor or not known to the woman or girl. There are the issues of forced marriage, forced pregnancy. We now add the issues of things like menstrual period poverty, and the whole thoughts around what happens to women and girls. I mean, menstruation is part, the natural part of what women and girls go through. And now in the new dynamic, the fact that many women and girls do not have access to services and the products, and can be denied, if you want to stay home because you can't work or go to school, you're punished because you want to stay home because of going through. So there's all of these like structural issues as well as the individual issues that we look at. There are some of us who now look at climate justice and the violence to Mother Earth as a form of gender-based violence, and that's and I know we're not talking, but the relationship, just to bring that in, because of how this idea of conquest and domination, if we consider the Earth as mother, those of us who are conquering and dominating, the language used, and that is something, a separate conversation. We look at the issues of denial of access to sexual and reproductive health and services. So, for example, many times, if many women might want to have access to maternal health services, but they're not available because the place where she lives does not have the hospitals, or the doctors and nurses wouldn't give it for whatever reason. In Guyana, we know abortion is legal, but abortion is not necessarily available in the public health system all around Guyana, right? So it's these things that there's a whole range of behavior. But intimate partner violence, of course, as we know, is one of the most talked about, one of the most that people experience. But there are all the other things. There's sexual harassment at work, sexual harassment in the streets, right? And sexual harassment in the streets is not illegal in Guyana. Sexual harassment in the workplace is illegal under the Prevention of Discrimination Act, right? So.
Okay. I know Mr. Kissoon doesn't.
Sorry, you asked.
That's
You should
okay.
tell me to shut up.
Mr.
Right?
Kissoon covered a
Sorry.
lot for the times. I think one I will mention that I did not hear is socioeconomic as a type, but that also ties into how you was talking. Mr. Kissoon was sharing about denying access to things for your monthly cycle. Socioeconomic also covers where she's not allowed to go and get a job, or if she does work, then no, the money has to be given to the male part in the relationship, or take a lot of their freedom. So that is covered under that.
Right. And of course, all these various types of violence will have, varying effects on both male and female. Can we now touch on some of these? Maybe you can touch on male, and Ms. Kissoon can touch on female, and then we can go from
Sorry,
there.
you mean the impact on those who are surviving,
Yes.
like sexual violence or
Yes.
intimate partner
Yes.
violence? So certainly, just to okay, I think you bring up that question later, but we didn't talk about that. If anybody here listening to the program has needs help and feels that they're listening to what we're talking about, in case that they need to talk to someone, because this is a disturbing topic. There are things like the 914 number, the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Human Services, and I think all the numbers for ChildLinK for the NCC, which I think you have the Spanish
Yes.
language. Right?
Correct.
Just-
Because we
just-
cater to both the locals and Spanish, we actually have helpline numbers for both English speakers and Spanish, and I can give those numbers. Do you want me to give it now or
You can
afterwards?
share it now.
All
and
right,
then
so
afterwards again.
our helpline numbers are 637 1939 and 628 7833. Those are our helpline numbers that anybody who needs assistance. Maybe at this point in the conversation, you might not be certain, but as we progress and share information, if you feel there is a need to reach out to the helpline numbers, then you can.
Right. I think on Facebook, everybody has pages and so there's help available where people will reply. So, all right. Right. So the impact. So you want me to look at male survivors? Now,
Yes.
first of all, generally the impact on the experience that survivors have and how they cope with it, and depending what's happening with them, really depends on multiple things, not just their gender. Right. So the gender identity comes into, but of course it could depend on their age, ethnicity, the economic background they have, and their ability to say access services, the distance they live from where services might be available, their knowledge of services which might be available, the way the community and family would respond to them and support them. So a person who might be living further away from Georgetown might have greater difficulty in accessing services. The impact depends on what form of violence it is and who the perpetrator is. Typically, survivors, male survivors would report might talk about feeling that they are to blame. If it's, say, a male survivor, many men and boys have survived child sexual abuse from male relatives, and that's something we don't talk about with the adult survivors of child sexual abuse. I know ChildLinK has a great program, they're protecting boys. But we have a lot of men who are going around with the trauma of having survived child sexual abuse perpetrated by either men or women, and that has led to inability to form strong relationships. And again, it depends on what the issues were, what other interventions were happening. It could lead to substance abuse, issues around substance abuse, um, depending on where they are, affecting schoolwork, things like that. Might want to run away from home if it's a situation from home. I just said, aggression towards partners, and so there's there are things that many perpetrators of violence within family settings themselves would have witnessed or seen or experienced violence as children. And most of the men who abuse women, about 3/4 of the men who abuse women, would have seen their fathers abuse women. So that kind of secondary trauma, that is the impact as well. So unless their interventions would say, okay, you don't have to be like this, and we can heal from it. So multiple impacts, different ones, and there's no one size fits all for anyone. And therefore, that's why anyone intervening would have to listen and understand and explore, what a path to wellness would look like.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Kissoon.
I think a lot of what Mr. Kissoon just shared is actually also similar for the aspect of the females. There is depression, self-harm, isolation, self-blame, depending on the age that he mentioned, falling behind in school, becoming violent themselves, also turn around and become perpetrators. And to add to what he said from the male perspective, what you would also find, like one of the difference even with the impacts, is that even though it might be hard on both sides to actually be able to talk to someone and tell them, it is, I think, it is harder for a male to actually be able to say, this is what happened to me, as compared to a female, because of all the shame and stigma that would be attached to that, and they would now internalize it. You know, if I say this, somebody's gonna look at me different, and those are some of the impacts from the male side, which that's something that also happens for female, where shame and self-blame happens. Sometimes it might be a situation where the perpetrator is related to somebody who you look up to, and so you don't want to feel as though you're going to break up the homes or cause a problem by saying, this is what this person happens to me. And so you begin to internalize, and they suffer additionally because of this.
That's right. And when it comes to men and the challenges that they face when maybe thinking about reporting gender-based violence, and all these societal perceptions when it relates to masculinity and so on. I
Correct.
want to know, how can we start combating some of these so that men will feel that it's easier to go and make reports if they're being abused.
I think more campaigns to help people understand, simply, a man crying doesn't mean that he's not strong. It doesn't go against his masculinity. At the end of the day, he's human. He has emotion. He feels. He bleeds. He hurts just like a female. Sensitizations, and it's going to be hard, but culture changes, because this is not only societal but culture and tradition passed down, where we believe, because males are the protectors, they're supposed to be the leaders. There's a certain expectation that they don't have feelings, they're robots, they're just supposed to move and function, but that's not true, and that's not the reality. So people being able to open up and understand and accept that a man can be vulnerable, and that doesn't mean he's any less male, then that will start to initiate more conversations and more perceptions and understanding that it's okay for you to feel and to let people know what you're going through as a male, and you don't have to shoulder everything by yourself, and so that would help.
What about you, Mr. Kissoon?
Right. So, noting that point about, first of all, I got to transform ideas of masculinity. Of course, one of the things we got to understand is, men again are diverse. There's age, ethnicity, sexual orientations. Of course, if it's a gay or bisexual man, the way the state responds or the police or so would respond might be different from if it's a straight man. And so that's why all of these things we have to factor in into how service providers are trained and held accountable, because well, just to put here, and we'll reinforce it later, all of the laws and the services in Guyana are what we call gender neutral, with perhaps the exception of shelters and safe spaces, which are very focused because of the poverty. We talk about the structural violence of women and poverty is that women are less likely to have access to alternative shelters than men, because in our economy, women might not have access to housing the same way that men do. So, but all of the other services, the Domestic Violence Act, all those laws and everything, they're all what we call gender neutral, in which it is, it does not assume anything. But all the service providers have to be trained in terms of understanding gender, so that when they see a person before them, understanding how, like, the expectations. A woman might feel that she's not supposed to leave the marriage because, no matter what, she's supposed to stay with the man till she's dead, right? Or a man comes, he's not supposed to report that or that what he's doing, if he's a perpetrator, that what he's doing is right. I think Help and Shelter has a program with male perpetrators of violence, which, teaches accountability and that is something now that we have to have a lot more. I said the conversation, we got to talk about the healing, about what, behavior should look like, to recognize what violence we've experienced and what we might be perpetrating. Not that we become, we're not expected to become, as I said, it's about healing and building nurturing relationships with those around us. And bearing in mind that we're living in violent societies, there's a violence, it's not just us alone, right? We're living in histories of violence. Guyana was founded out of violence, colonial violence. So we had slavery, indentureship. We still got people beating children in schools, thinking it's okay to beat children in schools, thinking it's okay to beat children at home. So we can't talk about ending gender-based violence if we can still want to beat children. Those two are and I'm very, very grateful to ChildLinK for also, enforcing that. All of this, all violence is interconnected. So our use and attitude, we can't be talking about one without dealing with the other. And that's something we had to learn. I had to stop beating children. I have to stop drinking alcohol. Because there's a connection between alcohol and men's violence, which we don't like to talk about in Guyana, right? As part of the masculinity. But, one thing I had to do was to stop drinking alcohol because I could not be a man doing this work and drinking alcohol, but contributing to the alcohol culture, right? So these are the things that, yes, and to know that it's okay. And there are many men who are, it's possible there are many men who are talking about this. There's a Men Engage Alliance which has the program for how we engage men and boys in this work and speak to men and boys about, upturning, like what Ms. Williams said, the traditional, this whole violent kind of masculinity, which is you got to put up and, right, we hear, we expect men to witness violence and say nothing.
True.
This is the thing with our schoolboy violence and everybody who's watching it, filming it. It's not only, it's all the bystanders, all the people. We're going on with, it's trauma all around, right?
Correct.
It's not just those two. There's a young policeman he tried to part a fight and he gets hit.
And that's the other thing where you have
What
a lot of
happened to that
bystanders.
poor, young policeman, right? What was he going through? And these two youngsters he's trying, we're going on with them. And what does healing look like? And what's going on in their families and communities that produce that?
Yeah.
Right? So it's not just them alone. You know what I mean? It's a whole
It
series
starts
of
at
things.
home.
Right? No, but it's not only, it's home, it's community, it's country, right? There's layer there.
Yeah, there's layer. But at the ground level, we need to start from within our homes. Yes.
You got to be called that fancy word, sociological matter, where we have the individual, the family, the community, and the country.
Correct.
So while the country might have laws and everything, but community level now, you got to say here now. This is not, we got to look out for each other, which we don't do. We mind each other's business, but we don't really look out for each other.
That a lot of conversations like these need to happen on a continuous basis, so that bystanders can also know the role that they play when it comes to prevention and reporting of violence. I want to touch, because Ms. Williams, you do a lot of work with migrants also, right? And we're looking at survivors on a whole here this evening. So maybe we can touch a bit on some of the challenges that they would face when it comes to reporting gender-based violence and so on.
Oh, for the migrants, I think the biggest one is the language, and that's one of the reasons we actually made sure to have somebody who's bilingual as a part of our team to help remove that barrier. But what would even happen sometimes, it's before the challenges we used to have is where you'd go to the station, you have this bilingual person, and then they would say, well, we can't accept you as a translator, right? So they wanted some more reassurance than just somebody speaking Spanish. But those are hurdles that we cross. We've built a relationship with a lot of different police stations within Region 3 and 4, and even outside of Region 3 and 4. So we no longer have that challenge. But before and even outside of the organization, because there are lots of migrants who need support that might not reach us, who we know face that barrier. Because even sometimes a police officer from a station might reach out and say, can you guys assist us, because we have this case with these migrants, and our immigration bilingual person might not be available. So we know it's still happening up there, but so that is definitely number one, the language. Sometime before a case comes to us, a client might already be in the custody of the police for something, and when it comes to us and then you reach out to see what's going on, that fear for that person as an outsider in a country nobody understands you and you're there in the lockup, it is very concerning. You feel so sorry for them. So definitely the language barrier is one of the biggest one that needs more addressing, because there's only so much we can do.
That's right.
So if I could just add something else, and we've always, there's a sort of dynamic we have in Ghana about language, and just to say that sometimes translation is not just about, like, say, of course, the Spanish to English or Creole for Haitian migrants, but within Ghana too, within indigenous communities, and so one of the ways many, we have this problem of trafficking. Trafficking is another form of gender-based violence, which
correct.
I mean, we were talking a lot.
Yeah.
And that too is complicated by many factors, because it's about poverty and displacement. But what we have to is a small minority of cases where there are many people who speak only indigenous languages or do not speak do not speak English very well in indigenous communities, and therefore there is a need. But our interpreters, and so we have to have a system, and I'm not sure we have it there. It has to be a systemic issue, because if our interpreters don't understand the issue,
Correct.
because some things can be lost in translation.
That's right.
And that has already happened a lot, even when talking about was violence and was abuse. Because we know we talk about abuse out. So we talk about abuse, everybody thinking there's abuse out we're talking about, and not all the other things. So language is something that we're always working on, like, how do we talk about these things where our Creoles in our own way that we understand. But bearing in mind that we have to be open-minded, that you might have to, the state has to find a way to put policy that Ghana is no longer English speaking alone. There are going to be many persons coming through different languages. We already had problems when, when Haitian migrants were locked up. No one spoke Creole. No one, So, and we're going to have a lot, that's the nature of the world, right? People are moving, people move all over. And gender-based violence happens in crisis,
Yeah.
so that COVID,
COVID was a good example.
Right? COVID was
COVID
one.
was a good
And
example.
I'm just bringing to the table, there was this discussion smart with women with disabilities. So even as we talk about migrants and we talk about others, we also remember there are other intersecting identities, like, being with disabilities, sexual orientation, language, which might prevent, getting access to services. So service providers got to know, all of us who want to help, we have to understand all these dynamics.
Yes. As the conversation flows, there are so many things that are popping up, and I'm sure, discussing this topic here this afternoon, our viewers are definitely, their knowledge are going to be so vast on the topic, gender-based violence, when it comes to understanding it, the impact it have on survivors, and so on. You both have been doing work with gender-based violence for years. Is there are there like a few maybe success stories, maybe some survivors that you've encountered over the years that you want to share, so that persons can just get like an understanding of what they would have gone through, how they would have come out and seek help and so on. Yeah.
Um, so ideally, I hope at some point you will have survivors on the program, right? So I just want to acknowledge any survivors who will be listening to us and knowing that these conversations, and there are many survivors who've shared their stories in different, and just acknowledging all survivors.
That's right.
And I know, like, and I call two names, Bibi Ahmad and Carlotta Walcott, are two people who have, they're doing survivor advocacy work and therapeutic work. So to say that the conversations during the pandemic, and so with Carl, we had a series where we called DV Conversations, where we're just, having the same kind of conversation, usually among people who are survivors and service providers. And to understand that healing is a journey. That leaving a relationship, for survival of intimate partner violence, leaving a relationship is step zero sometimes. Because there's got to be a lot of unpacking of all of the experience of violence, of the feelings of inadequacy, helplessness, to then move on. And many times, the way we are structured to help is to say, okay, I gotta get out of this relationship. So we're done there.
True.
But it doesn't really happen like that.
That's true.
For survivors of sexual violence, justice, we have to start thinking about what justice means, because justice might not mean the same to all of us.
True.
We have low conviction. We were having the DVP in a forum last week, Friday, said that there's an increase in reports, probably because of awareness, of sexual offenses. However, depending with conviction rates and so on, we know that in many times the perpetrator does not go to jail. So what do we do then if you have people out there? What does justice look like? And then some people might say, let me take the money and done. Justice for survivor looks different for every survivor. We gotta just say, let me just settle, because rather than go through the whole madness with how much years of court and it doesn't make sense, right? So every different survivor has a different healing journey and experience. And my learnings from survivors is that there's a mix of joy and sorrow. Just as saying that leaving a relationship does not mean that they wouldn't grieve for what might have been. Because you go into a relationship, you're thinking
invest so much time.
Right.
Yeah.
So even as you gotta leave for your personal security. Then there are people who would tell us, you might leave physically, but you don't leave emotionally. So really and truly, the leaving, the letting go, and all of us who've been in love and been in bad love, we all know, right? It's difficult to fall out of love and them things, right? But basically, so there's a lot of work, in community and discussion about how you really move forward and move. And remember, a lot of us is because we might have had experiences of violence, of parents, intergenerational issues.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of baggage we are carrying, right? So, but there are many survivors who have told stories, and our ability to give survivors space to tell the story. I think the success has to be, what do we do? For me personally, is when a survivor decides to share a story publicly without shame, whether any gender. Right? When any survivor and that story is received by people without having any judgment or shame.
That's right.
Right? And that's just, but we got to do a lot more work. I said there's some systemic issues that we have to fix. We got to one-on-one providing the thing, that alone. I started this work in 1995, and I'm writing and saying some of the same things that we said 20 years ago. That's not very good, right? So there's some systemic patriarchy. How we got issues of prominent persons who've been accused of gender-based violence, who are in politics, in the media, in culture. So we don't have a standard response to how we're dealing with and every time we deny, I think every time we say, the perpetrator is innocent and she must make he do something, we're denying that perpetrator a chance to heal. Because the perpetrators got to heal too. And right, our justice system can hold them accountable and go to jail and so on. But jail don't always mean healing or rehabilitation. True. Right? So every time a policeman helps an abuser to get away, the policeman is denying. Anytime an organization protects its people, or you're protecting a family member from court and police and want to settle a matter, you still have to stop that person, find out who's making that person behaving like that, and stop it. So that's in the society. That's why the continuous work in education. I think that's why ChildLink's work with boys is really good, because it's about saying, hey, what's going on with us, and trying to unpack that.
Yeah.
Right, you should have told me to shut up. Sorry. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
True.
So,
For us, let me see some success stories. We had a client who I'm trying to see how to share information without sharing information.
Right.
Because we're very big on confidentiality.
Can I just ask this, like, what would you frame? How does the NCC frame success? Maybe if you do it that way.
All right. So if a client reached out to a service and whatever their need was met, then we would consider that a success. All right. Because there are some instances where a client might come to us and they're going through counseling, but they have not healed, to use your word, during that time. And so we would not consider that a success story. But when we have interactions with client, we offer them, for example, counseling. And then after our designated amount of sessions, to the end of it, the client can show that they would have worked through the healing process, that they would have learned how to cope on their own, how to function again in society, how to carry on daily life and not, burst into tears, or they're no longer afraid, that they can function on their own, then we would consider that a success story. And we have had those. From a legal standpoint, we would have, like you would have explained, leaving is always be zero for them. That's one of the challenges as well with survivors. They're going through these difficulties in life, and the service providers, sometimes because we might not be in a position, we might not be able to understand. And we have this information and we're coming to them saying, well, this is what you should do. This is in your best interest. And we expect that they're just going to pick up with that and run. And that's not always the case, because sometimes mentally they're not prepared to step out of that zone that they're in, that space that they're in. Yeah, we want the violence to stop, but at the same time, I don't feel as though I know how to carry on living without this person by my side. So we apply a client's right approach. So it's all about what the client works. So we give them the information and guide them, and we hold their hands while reassuring them until they reach a point where they can make that decision for themselves. And we actually had a legal case that was a success story for us, where that is what happened. Our client would have reached out, and she was a survivor of abuse, and we would have said, based on what you shared, these are the steps that you need to take in the best interest of yourself and security. And we had to wait on her to make the next step, and that never happened. And she, we no longer heard from her. And then after a couple of months, she reached back again. We're in the same position, and we said to her, well, this is where we are in your case management, and this is what you need in order to be able to ensure your security and your safety. So what are you going to do? And then she made up her mind at that point in time, and we were able to go through the necessary steps to be able to get her protection order, and things worked out in her favor, and we haven't had any complaints or interaction again where she, is threatened or she needs the services because she's experiencing this again. So that was another one of her success stories.
Just to say that sometimes also the word success is complicated, but I think the fact that someone reaches out
it's a success
is the first, how, right?
Step.
So the first time when someone realizes, because the first stage in an experience of abuse, the first stage is denial, or trying to minimize or ignore. No, man, it was just a slap.
Yeah.
Or eat drunk, or I do be the quarreling, or
It's my fault.
or it's my fault, or I just slap you, maybe I shouldn't do this, and so on. So there's a whole series of stages as a survivor who's seeing this in intimate partner violence.
Especially when it's not physical abuse.
Right.
And
it's so
they
difficult
don't understand. Correct.
the gaslighting, all the
Correct.
stuff,
And they don't
right?
understand.
The controlling behaviors. And even sexual violence, there's sexual manipulation, which
Especially in marriages.
right. Yeah.
Correct. Because a lot of people don't
So
understand rape happens in
it's marriage.
marriages.
And Ghana now, it's okay. I mean, in Ghana, the law is clear that regardless of the relationship,
Even in marriage,
you can
without
claim.
consent,
And
it's
there's a
rape.
whole range of sexual offenses now, not just rape. Rape is
Mm-hmm.
broad definition. It's not just penis and vagina.
Correct.
And as I, but to say too that for survivors, there's a point here, right? That even if survivors want to stay in a relationship, that they're safety planning to say, okay, you want to stay. Well, how will you keep yourself safe?
Correct.
And there's this issue, and we acknowledge. I remember many women who experienced and survived violence said that they would have left the relationship or left the man in their head in a way, mentally, but they would have stayed physically because of marriage, society, like cookie food and left it for you. They had to do those
Sometimes
things.
economics is the reason they stay as well. I have nowhere to
Entrapment,
go.
right?
I
Entrapment
don't have
is
the
a
finances.
whole.
Correct.
And we must understand that many times a person leaving that situation sometimes has to leave family, has to leave church community, has to change job. It's an uprooting of everything. It's not just coming out of a relationship.
Correct.
People have had to change country. You move from Berbice to Georgetown. So it's a lot of movement, and often without support, especially if the family is mixed up and so about
Correct.
all of these things, right? So we understand that survivorship is a process and healing is a journey. And I think for all of us who want to help and it's to listen, and I think the thing is, listen, what do we want to keep you safe? What do you need to be safe? Even if you're there,
Correct.
how do you don't have to leave, you don't have to make any decisions now. Take your time, whenever you're ready. Could take years.
True.
Right? It could
True.
take many years.
True, because we actually have a case like that where we had a client within the space of a year would reach out lots of times, and every time she's like, no, this is the time. I'm going to pack my bags and I'm going to give you the call and let you know, and we're always waiting for that call. So it can take a very long time, and she has children to think about, so it's a lot.
Right. And we can never, what we also know is that we might not understand. You stay because God tell you, you got different God, you got different God, how, right?
Yeah.
Or, I mean, it's that we got to not be judgmental, because we might not understand love. He buy this house for me, right? And there's these complex things and dynamics.
And that's one of the first things with dealing with survivors in our line of work, to learn to remove our personal biases. Because sometimes that can affect the way we interact with our clients, and clients can also pick up on that, right? Sometimes they come into your space and somebody might make a comment, and right away they're on defensive. And when clients reach out to us and we have interactions, we want them to feel safe and comfortable, so they feel this is a safe space where they can open. So you have to learn how to remove your personal biases.
I like that you brought up this point, because this also relates to every other organization that is doing this type of work. And in the instance that there may be a viewer or more than one viewers that are thinking now, because of this conversation, to reach out for help, maybe Miss Williams, you want to share your numbers again, and share any other organization or support that persons can reach out to or seek help this afternoon.
All right, so our helpline numbers are 637-3319 and 628-7833. Those are helpline numbers. Organizations that we work along with, Help and Shelter. I know Ministry of Human Services and Social Support also have the 914 number, and they also aid with providing safe space as well as us. Those are within regions 4. Some other organizations I know outside, United Bricklayers, we have Hope for All, FACT, those are some, Blossom, even ChildLinK. Those are some other organizations. We do not have the numbers on hand, but I do believe you can Google the names on the internet to access those numbers.
I think the Ministry of Human Services with the 914 hotline has a kind of, but I think I saw that the ministry is also doing their referral pathway, which will also take into account all the NGOs and so we're providing. Because again, if people have spread, like, if you're LGBT, who are the organizations who, Guyana Trans United and so, could provide some support for like trans, specific
SASAD.
migrant, right, specific migrant communities, women with disabilities. Again, the coalition is now building capacity to do that, that as a research work. So there's a whole series of things because we got to keep, as I said, like many times, we have to appreciate it's not a one size fits all approach to.
True.
So there's different, the different issues. Every individual has different needs, and I think accountability is key. That any survivor who's approaching an organization which is supposed to help and they're not doing it, you can hold them accountable. To say, look, no, if you don't feel comfortable, you have to say, right. And that is something, especially with the state. We know that the police are being trained, but the police, I think, the police have to have their own accountability mechanism, which is only the level of
True.
the commanders and the commissioner. I think all of them put their phone numbers out there to say if anybody gets a problem with any police taking a report, you can call up. So it's involving everyone and monitoring and keeping. But as a community too, we got to break some of these attitudes to violence. It's about prevention too, right? We got to do a lot of prevention work as well.
And as you
Yeah.
mentioned, community, even with regards to earlier when we were talking about bystanders, I think a lot of persons would observe violence being enacted, and they're also afraid for themselves,
Right.
so they don't want to get involved. But it's good for community members to understand that even if you're afraid for your own safety, there are numbers that you can call. You can pick up a phone and call the police station within your community to say this is what's happened at this address. So you are still helping in some way.
Right, especially when children are involved. And again, I just reiterate, I think ChildLinK again. If you think any child is in a situation of violence or danger, please call the 914 number and make a report. Because the state, we have a child care and protection, we have the Protection of Children Act now. You don't have to investigate. You just call that number and make a report if you suspect any child is in any danger. They're not going to school, they're witnessing violence. Because children who witness violence also are affected and traumatized.
At
by-
least calls can be
Right.
made anonymously.
So,
It's not
yeah.
as though the caller
Yeah.
have to
Has
give
to,
their
the
name.
name,
So,
right,
some
yes,
persons
yes.
might be fearful of having to identify themselves.
Right.
You don't have to.
That's
Right? They
right.
can be anonymous calls.
That's right. And I know along the conversation, both of you would have shared maybe some ways that persons can, or some measures that can be taken to enhance public awareness and so on. Can we like dive into some more, because you would have mentioned like sensitization and so on? Can we go into some more of these?
So certainly the conversations that happen, and there are different things about the little dilemma that we have is what are we really raising awareness about? So on the one hand, you can raise awareness about the access to services. This is what abuse is and so on. But we got to do the other work, and Ms. Williams brought it up, and how we got to transform masculinity to stop abuse and violence, and just generally to transform our society. But we don't do that enough. Right? The Ministry of Education still allows beating of children in schools. So we can't fix gender-based violence when the minister can't fix the ministry can't fix beating children in schools. We wouldn't be able to do that. So you know what I mean? You can do all the awareness about this is the hotline, the helpline, this is the law, and so on. But we want to prevent it. We don't want people to need hotlines. You know what I mean? We don't want that to happen. So we got to look at our own experiences and attitudes of violence. For a lot of the men, if you think alcohol is a problem, we got to stop drinking. We got to challenge our alcohol culture. Alcohol is creating a lot of violence, right? One judge this year actually named that it's creating a burden on our healthcare and justice system. And the healthcare and justice system are already burdened, right? So these are the things that we got to look at, and that kind of awareness is not happening. You know what I mean? We can do all the things about this is abuse, and we have to keep doing that because the forms of abuse, the cyber violence, the revenge porn, all of those things are new dynamics, which so there are new ways people are using. They're using artificial, and I had this discussion. We had this, the way we're not in Guyana, but in other parts of the world, where abusers would hack into the homes of the persons they want to
Yes.
stalk to
Yes.
manipulate lighting and hack
If
into
they
the
have
phones.
cameras in their
So as technology advances and so on, the layers of, I think we talked about this, is how we manipulate systems and laws and right now, and by the way, abuse happens across all all spheres. The sophisticated people know how to manipulate their money and financial systems so that the survivors don't get anything. And they might appear wealthy, but they're not really wealthy, you know. So there's a whole series of things. People are hacking into records. And so,
Yeah.
and then there's this other fear too. When we look at the culture of violence, is like looking at how I read the other day that there are some men now who are using AI to generate women, which they then abuse and film, and they share that among themselves. So we move from now creating. So we're now creating scenarios where we might not be
Correct.
using ideas of
Without,
real
yeah.
women, but the idea that we must
Yes.
abuse femininity.
Yes.
And this is men younger than, and every time I see a man younger than me, get in jail and abusing, I feel like I failed. It's a success story because we started this work.
Yes,
It
yeah.
was supposed to have stopped with my generation. So I think we really got to look. That is the other kind of awareness which we're not doing. And as I said, we're connecting all of this to what's happening with our environment, our climate, the levels of violence everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things Mr. Kissoon just addressed is where we need to do more masculinity awareness and not just talking about what GBV is. And NCC actually have video productions that address alternative masculinity and also xenophobia. And we have these being run not just on the radio, on our social media platforms, and even on TV and in different regions, so that we can see how much awareness and sensitization we could bring to the topic, not just specifically gender-based violence in a general statement, but understanding that there is more to it at the ground level.
I just want to big up the National Two Shows Council, who just took on a project, because I've been involved in they're piloting a project to empower male two shows to be leaders to be agents of change in the fight against gender-based violence, and that process included those men having to address their own experiences with violence as well, right? So all of that is part of the work. I'm just saying that people were trying, but as I said, beyond we really and like this work with the using the word alternative masculinity, we use words like healthy masculinity,
Yes.
right? Because people don't want to hear toxic, man is a war.
Yeah.
I is toxic, I name man. Yeah, if you're beating up women and think woman, and so on, right? Yeah. Looking at other ways, which is about men's health. Men will die young, there are issues. And another man younger than me died recently, and I just mourn him because men die younger than women. So men's health is an issue. So there's men's mental health. All of those issues which are connected, which we talk about, which have to be addressed in ways. And again, not only one-on-one, but also in community. You got to have community spaces where men can
Correct.
gather, which are safe and nurturing, which are not about drinking and beating up.
That's
True.
Right, which is about healthy and promoting, and we don't have a lot of those spaces there. Like we try to do a mapping and something. So where could you go if you're a man, a group of boys or men, you want to socialize, which does not have any of this negative, like alcohol or anything, and in many places there nothing exists. Right,
That's
so
true.
that is and that is getting less worse. So. Or you still want to play violent video games, so there's all
True.
this, right?
A lot of
It
violent
is. The video,
simulations.
right? So there's a lot
Yeah.
there's a lot of nurturing. The reality is that we might be thinking that we're fighting one thing, and there are others who are trying to preserve the status quo. And
True.
this is one of the learnings. I used to think that everybody was against gender-based violence until I discovered that everybody wasn't. Right?
Yes,
That
it
is
is.
true.
There's definitely a lot of work still left to be
Yes.
done.
There is.
Yeah.
I want to encourage you both to continue doing the great work that you've been doing. And this is a conversation that can definitely go on,
can.
but unfortunately, we don't have the time. I want to give you each the opportunity. We're observing it's day 4 of 16 days of activism. So I want to ask you to just give a message to our viewers. What would you like them to know during this period, or what would you like to encourage them to do during this period, and as we go on, not only just during this 16 days of activism. Mr.
Right.
Kissoon?
So I think I just wanted to follow on from so to the young people on ChildLinK had said in their messages about the importance of community having things like mental health resources and so on. It's for us to start thinking about that. For each individual too, to think about what have been your own experiences with violence, and name understanding this violence and realizing change is difficult. Change and transformation might be difficult, but it is possible, and many people do come out of that. It is possible, right? So I just encourage anyone listening, and of course, reach out again. Contact 914, any of the numbers if you're experiencing this. If you're a man who wants to question what's happening with you, how you're treating your family, and you want to change your behavior, contact Help and Shelter before it gets worse. Many men don't realize that their behavior is abusive and controlling until they realize, and therefore it's important to check. If you feel that you're scared of your partner, and that something is wrong. If you feel afraid of your intimate partner, we have to deal with sexual harassment in the streets. We have to do. There's a lot of work. There's a whole separate conversation. Sexual harassment in the workplace, another conversation, right? And then, as I said, we have all the violence. But let us keep doing that. Keep talking and finding ways to meet and talk. And just to say thanks to ChildLinK for holding that, for giving space all the time for this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kissoon.
Yes. I think my message would be that mental health is important. Self-care is important. Everyone as an individual is worthy, and so you should not allow anybody to make you feel less of yourself. And if you feel that you're in a situation where that's how you find yourself feeling, low self-esteem, like you're not enough and you're dealing with these things, then please make use of the helpline numbers and the organizations that have been mentioned here this evening to get that support to help you move out of that situation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, and I want to thank both of you again, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to participate in this evening's discussion. I must say you've definitely broadened my perspective on gender-based violence, and I'm sure that you've had the same impact on our viewers this evening. So thank you, and I really do look forward to maybe having you guys on another discussion session where we can dive into the other issues that encompasses gender-based violence. But for this afternoon, we have to end our conversation. Unfortunately, this discussion was a part of our community's Responding in Emergencies project, which is funded by the Delegation of the European Union in Guyana. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in and being a part of our discussion this afternoon. I want to challenge you to share the information that you've learned, and if maybe someone is thinking of seeking help, you can always reach out to us at ChildLinK. Our numbers are 233-3500 and 233-3502, so you can give us a call and we'll definitely see how we can assist you. You can also check out our Facebook page. We're on Facebook as ChildLinK Inc. We're on Instagram as ChildLinK_Guyana. And even if you want to reach out to us on Twitter, we're on Twitter as ChildLinK Guyana. So yes, I encourage you to reach out to us, seek help, and share anything that you've learned in this conversation. I want to thank you again, and goodbye. Yes.